Saturday mornings in Maplewood Estates were usually the quietest time of the week. Most neighbors were sleeping in, the smell of freshly cut grass lingered in the air, and you could almost believe the HOA wasn't a nightmare run by control freaks. Almost. I was flipping pancakes in the kitchen when I heard the familiar sound of Karen Halstead's voice cutting through the calm, shrill, commanding, and dripping with self-importance. She wasn't even trying to be discreet. Her voice carried across fences like a megaphone. "Look at that fence! Unapproved paint color!" she shouted to no one in particular. "And the vehicles in the driveway, completely violating HOA Section 14C. I sighed. It was 8:30 in the morning, and Karen was already doing her rounds. My wife, Sarah Lawson, had just started her first real day off in nearly 2 months. Being the county sheriff wasn't exactly a stress-free job, and lately, every time she tried to rest, something, or someone, managed to interrupt her peace. "Do I even want to know what she's yelling about now?" Sarah asked groggily, stepping into the kitchen with her hair tied in a loose bun and a mug that read, "World's Best Sheriff." "She's upset about our fence again," I said. "Apparently it's too independent looking, whatever that means." Sarah chuckled. "Independent looking? I didn't realize wood grain could rebel." Before we could laugh about it more, we heard Karen's voice again. Louder this time, and this time she wasn't talking to herself. "I'm calling the authorities. There's been suspicious activity here for weeks. I saw a woman carrying a firearm last night." Sarah nearly spat her coffee out. "Suspicious woman? Carrying a firearm? That would be me." "Of course it is," I said with a sigh. "You were in uniform, walking from the garage after work. She probably thought you were part of some rogue task force plotting to overthrow her HOA empire." Sarah smirked and leaned against the counter. "She's really asking for it, isn't she?" I shrugged. "She wouldn't know what she's asking for if it showed up in uniform." We thought it would end there, just another of Karen's morning tirades. But an hour later, I heard something unusual. A car engine, gravel crunching. Then the faint flicker of red and blue lights outside our window. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "No way." I peeked through the blinds and froze. A patrol car had pulled up right in front of our house. 2 officers stepped out, one younger, one older, both looking uncomfortable, as if they'd been sent on a mission they didn't understand. "Sir?" the younger one called politely as I stepped outside. "We received a call from the HOA about possible violations and reports of a firearm being brandished on the property." I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. "Let me guess. Karen?" Before the officer could answer, Karen herself stormed out of her yard, clipboard in hand, waving it like a sword. "That's them. The woman's been carrying a gun around the neighborhood. I've been documenting every violation for months." Sarah walked out behind me, still in her pajamas, mug in hand. "Morning, officers. What seems to be the problem?" Karen scoffed. "Who are you supposed to be? The criminal's wife?" Sarah took a slow sip of coffee before replying, her tone cool and calm. "Actually, I'm the county sheriff." The younger officer blinked. "Wait, Sheriff Lawson?" Karen froze. "Sheriff? Her?" Sarah nodded, setting her mug down on the porch rail. "Yes, ma'am. Cedar County Sheriff. And you just called in a false report on law enforcement." For the first time since I'd met her, Karen didn't have a comeback ready. Her face twisted between disbelief and embarrassment. "That's impossible. You can't be the sheriff. You don't even have your badge on." Sarah smiled faintly. "I don't wear it with pajamas." The older officer, clearly trying not to grin, stepped forward. "Ma'am, we can confirm she's the sheriff. Dispatch already, ver." Sarah folded her arms. "And there are laws, one of which says filing false police reports is a crime." The younger cop turned to me, clearly amused. "Sir, sorry about the confusion. We'll mark this as resolved." Karen sputtered as the officers got back into their car. "You can't just leave! She's dangerous!" Sarah called after them. "Not as dangerous as caffeine withdrawal, Karen. Have a nice morning." The officers laughed as they drove off, leaving Karen standing in the middle of the street, red-faced and fuming. As we walked back inside, Sarah shook her head. You know, I deal with all kinds of criminals, but HOA Karens, they might be the most dangerous of them all. I chuckled. Should I make coffee for you or backup? She grinned. Both. That morning, the whole neighborhood learned one simple truth. If you're going to call the cops, make sure you know who you're calling them on. The next few days after the incident were quiet. Too quiet. No early morning rants, no angry knocking, no flyers taped to our door about fence non-compliance. Even the neighborhood gossip chat had gone silent, which only meant one thing. Karen was plotting. Sarah sensed it too. She had that sixth sense law enforcement officers develop after years of dealing with petty drama that turns into real problems. Mark my words, she said one evening as she cleaned her sidearm at the kitchen table. That woman isn't done. People like her never just let things go. You think she's planning another move? I asked. Sarah gave me that you really have to ask look. Oh, she's planning something. I just don't know what yet. The answer came the very next morning. I opened the mailbox to find a thick white envelope stamped with the HOA's emblem, gold letters and a logo that looked suspiciously like a crown. Inside was a letter titled in bold red font, Notice of Non-Compliance and Penalty. Apparently, we were being fined $1,000 for failure to register firearms on HOA property, which of course was completely absurd. The HOA had no authority over firearms, law enforcement, or even what color mailbox you had unless it was in their bylaws. Sarah read the letter and let out a long, tired sigh. You've got to be kidding me. Oh, it gets better, I said, flipping to the second page. They also scheduled a mandatory disciplinary hearing next week for security threats to the community. Sarah raised an eyebrow. A disciplinary hearing? Are we in school now? I smirked. Apparently. Karen's the principal. But Sarah wasn't laughing. They're crossing a line. You can't fine a law enforcement officer for doing her job. This is going beyond annoying. It's harassment. That's when the idea hit her. Maybe it's time we play this the official way. The following week, we walked into the HOA clubhouse, where a long table of board members sat waiting, all of them looking uncomfortable, except for one person. Karen. She sat at the head of the table, lips pursed, clipboard in hand, radiating smug satisfaction. Well, well, she said, in that nasal, over-enunciated tone she reserved for power trips. I'm glad you both decided to show up. We take community safety very seriously here at Maplewood Estates. Sarah smiled politely. Oh, I'm sure you do. Karen cleared her throat. Let's begin. According to our records, Mrs. Lawson, she paused dramatically, was seen brandishing a firearm in public view. That constitutes a safety hazard and clear violation of HOA Ordinance Section 8B. Sarah didn't even blink. That firearm was my service weapon, and I wasn't brandishing it. I was coming home from work. You know, my job as county sheriff. Karen waved her hand dismissively. Titles don't exempt you from the rules, dear. We're all equal under the HOA's code. The rest of the board shifted uncomfortably. One man at the end whispered, Karen, are we sure we have jurisdiction over that? Karen glared at him. Of course we do. The HOA handbook clearly states... Sarah leaned forward, calm but firm. The HOA handbook isn't law. And by sending false reports to the police and issuing unlawful fines, you're actually violating county statutes, not to mention my civil rights. You could have heard a pin drop. Karen blinked, her confidence faltering. Now, hold on. Sarah pulled out a folder from her bag and slid it across the table. Inside was documentation. Copies of the false police call transcript, the HOA's fine notice, and a copy of the County Ordinance 41-7, which specifically stated that HOA regulations cannot override federal, state, or county law. Sarah continued, voice steady but sharp. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to retract this fine, remove all mention of me from your records, and issue an apology. Otherwise, I'll be forced to open an investigation into your misuse of HOA funds and your harassment of local residents." Karen's face drained of color. "Investigation? You can't—" "I can," Sarah interrupted, leaning back in her chair. "And I will." The board members looked at one another nervously. One finally spoke up. "I move to dismiss the fine and strike the complaint." "Seconded," another muttered. "All in favor?" Every hand at the table, except Karen's, shot up. Karen's jaw dropped. "You can't just—" Sarah stood. "You just did." As we walked out, Karen's voice trembled with fury behind us. "You'll regret this. I'll take it to the regional board." Sarah turned back with a calm smile. "Be sure to tell them the sheriff sends her regards." That night, back home, I couldn't stop grinning. "You absolutely destroyed her," I said, handing Sarah a cup of tea. Sarah chuckled softly. "I didn't destroy her. I just reminded her there are bigger laws than her HOA handbook." I raised my cup. "To justice." She clinked hers against mine. "To peace and quiet, while it lasts." Outside, through the blinds, I caught sight of Karen standing on her porch in the dark, phone in hand, glaring toward our house. Peace and quiet, huh? Yeah. Somehow I had a feeling the next chapter was going to be anything but quiet. After the so-called hearing, most neighbors thought things had finally settled. For a week, the cul-de-sac was unusually peaceful. No complaint notes on doors, no HOA letters, no mysterious fines. Even the group chat, usually buzzing with Karen's long rants about community standards, went silent. But Sarah didn't buy it for a second. "She's up to something," she said one morning, sipping her coffee by the window. "Women like her don't lose quietly. They stew, they scheme, and then they explode," I chuckled. "You make it sound like a spy movie." Sarah turned her gaze from the window. "It's not far off. The difference is, this one leaves evidence." And sure enough, by Friday night, the evidence arrived. It was just past 9 p.m. when we heard loud banging on the garage door, 3 sharp knocks, then a pause, then 3 more. I opened the door and found 2 county officers standing there. Behind them, in her trademark pastel sweater and clutching her phone like a sword, stood Karen. "Evening, officers," Sarah said calmly as she stepped beside me, already recognizing both deputies from her department. One of them, Officer Lopez, looked mortified. Sheriff, sorry about this, but we got a call about stolen property being stored here." Karen immediately jumped in, waving her phone. "Yes, I have video proof. This man and his wife have been storing unauthorized materials in their garage. I believe it's stolen HOA property. They refuse to comply with regulations." Lopez sighed. "Ma'am, what exactly was stolen?" Karen looked triumphant. "Garden tools. HOA-owned maintenance equipment. I saw them carrying something metallic into their garage last night." I blinked, then turned to Sarah. "Metallic? You mean the bike rack I installed?" Sarah rubbed her forehead. "Oh, for the love of—" Karen cut her off. "Don't try to deny it. I recorded it on my security camera." She held up her phone proudly, showing grainy footage of me carrying a silver metal bar into the garage. Lopez peered at it, squinting. "Ma'am, that looks like a bicycle stand." Karen's voice went shrill. "It's stolen. The HOA inventory went missing last month." Lopez turned to Sarah. "Sheriff, can we—" Sarah nodded and led them inside, flipping on the garage light. There it was, my half-assembled bike stand, still covered in the manufacturer's wrapping. A receipt from Home Depot was taped right next to it. Sarah handed it over with a wry smile. "You'll want to check the timestamp. Bought yesterday. Want me to pull up my body cam from that time for verification?" Lopez stifled a grin. "No need, Sheriff. This is plenty." Karen, however, refused to accept defeat. "She's hiding the real stolen items. They're in the back. She's using her badge to cover it up." Lopez cleared his throat. "Ma'am, you've made a false police report. Again." Karen gasped as if insulted. How dare you? I am the HOA president. You can't talk to me like that. Sarah folded her arms. Actually, he can. And you might want to remember that filing a false theft report is a misdemeanor offense. Karen went pale. I didn't know. Lopez finished her sentence. And repeated false reports can lead to criminal charges. The other officer finally spoke up. Ma'am, we suggest you leave before this becomes official. Karen stumbled backward, muttering about ungrateful law enforcement and uneducated neighbors, before scurrying off down the driveway. The officers turned to Sarah, both barely holding back laughter. You attract the weird ones, Sheriff, Sarah chuckled. Occupational hazard. When the door closed and silence returned, Sarah leaned against the wall and exhaled deeply. That's strike two. She's not just delusional, she's getting desperate. I nodded. So what now? Do we just wait for strike three? Sarah shook her head. No, this time we go on the offense. I'm tired of her thinking she can weaponize authority she doesn't have. That night, she started digging. She went through public records, HOA meeting notes, and even tax filings, all publicly available data. What she found was interesting. Turns out Karen had been using HOA funds for community projects that didn't exist. Landscaping expenses for beautification programs, contractor payments for fence repairs, all signed by one person, her. Sarah smiled. Bingo. We filed a report to the County Fraud Division the next morning, attaching the evidence. It wasn't vengeance. It was accountability. And within days, the investigation quietly began. 2 weeks later, a new drama unfolded. We were sitting on the porch when a black county vehicle pulled into Karen's driveway. 2 men in suits stepped out, flashing badges. They knocked on her door, and after a moment, she appeared. Robe, rollers, and confusion painted across her face. They handed her a file. She went pale instantly. We couldn't hear the conversation, but her body language said it all. First denial, then panic, then rage. She pointed in our direction, screaming something unintelligible. One of the investigators turned, gave a small nod toward Sarah, then got back in the car. Karen stood frozen on her lawn as the vehicle drove away. I looked at Sarah. Strike three? Sarah smirked. And she's out. That evening, our mailbox was unusually full. Not with hate mail this time, but letters of apology from the HOA board members. They explained that Karen had been temporarily removed from her position pending investigation. Apparently, embezzling HOA funds didn't look great when the sheriff was your neighbor. Sarah read the letter aloud, laughing softly. Well, justice has a funny way of balancing things, doesn't it? I grinned. What's next? She leaned back in her chair. Hopefully peace. But with Karen, peace never lasts long. 3 weeks after the fraud investigation began, the neighborhood had gone eerily quiet. The gossip channels went silent, the usual HOA drama stopped, and even the lawns that Karen once micromanaged were now growing freely, wild and green. It was the calm before the storm. I could tell something big was coming. You could feel it in the air. That uneasy hush, like the whole street was holding its breath. Even the dogs didn't bark that week. Sarah, ever the professional, didn't talk much about the case. She was involved just enough to know that the County Fraud Division had uncovered significant irregularities, but she stayed in her lane to avoid any conflict of interest. Still, every night, she'd glance at her phone, waiting for an update. Then, one afternoon, as we were coming home from the grocery store, we saw it. A convoy of 3 black county vehicles parked in front of Karen's house. Lights flashing, officers walking purposefully toward her door. Sarah parked the car slowly. Showtime, she whispered. Karen burst out of her front door in a panic, waving her hands as if that would stop the officers. You can't do this! I am the HOA! This is private property! One of the investigators held up a document. Ms. Jenkins, we have a warrant for your arrest. Misappropriation of HOA funds. falsifying public records, and obstruction of an investigation. The entire neighborhood had come out by then. Curtains lifted, phones raised. The same neighbors who once feared Karen now watched in silent awe as she pleaded, shrieked, and stomped her feet like a tantrum-throwing child. "You don't understand," she cried. "They set me up. That sheriff, she's corrupt. She hates me." The lead officer turned calmly. "The sheriff didn't file the complaint, ma'am. The HOA board did, along with 5 residents who confirmed your misuse of funds." Karen froze. "What?" Sarah stepped out of our car then, arms folded. The officers gave her a respectful nod. Karen's face turned crimson. "You!" she screamed, pointing at Sarah like a villain in a bad movie. "You think you can take everything from me? This is my community." Sarah stayed composed. "Karen, it was your community, but you made it everyone else's problem." Karen's voice cracked. "You don't understand. I was trying to make it perfect. You people don't follow rules, you—" Sarah cut her off, her tone cold but calm. "Rules don't matter when the person enforcing them doesn't follow the law." The words hit like a punch. Karen's defiance melted into shock. She looked around at the faces of her neighbors, people she'd bullied, fined, and embarrassed, all now staring at her not with fear, but with pity. And then something truly ironic happened. When the officers moved to place her under arrest, Karen resisted. She yanked her arm away, yelling about citizens' rights and HOA immunity. Within seconds, she was gently but firmly cuffed and led to the car. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't need to. The silence, the collective sigh of relief, said it all. Over the next few days, the story exploded online. Local news picked it up. HOA president arrested for embezzlement. Sheriff was her neighbor. Everyone suddenly wanted an interview. Reporters called nonstop. Some neighbors even started a petition to dissolve the HOA altogether. But Sarah wanted none of it. She didn't gloat, didn't brag, didn't even smile when the news ran her photo. She simply said, "Justice isn't about winning, it's about restoring balance." I remember asking her that night, "So, is it finally over?" She smirked faintly. "Almost." A few weeks later, the new interim HOA board sent out a notice. They were refunding some residents' fines, reinstating wrongly penalized members, and proposing a vote to dissolve the HOA entirely. It passed unanimously. Karen's once pristine suburban empire crumbled in one meeting. The signs that once said HOA rules enforced were taken down. The clipboard she used to carry everywhere? Now a meme in the neighborhood group chat. But the best part, the poetic ending, came during one of Sarah's morning jogs. She spotted Karen again, not in a sweater and pearls this time, but in a county orange vest, picking up trash as part of her community service sentence. Their eyes met for a second. Karen froze, face red with humiliation. Sarah just nodded politely and kept jogging, earbuds in, smile faint on her face. It wasn't revenge, it was closure. That evening we sat on the porch watching the sunset spill across the rooftops, the air finally quiet and peaceful. Sarah leaned back, sipping her coffee. "You know, for all her noise, she sure left things better than she found them." I laughed. "You mean by getting arrested?" She smirked. "By reminding people what happens when power goes unchecked." The sound of cicadas filled the air. No yelling, no drama, no HOA meetings, just calm. After months of tension, that quiet was the sweetest sound in the world. And as the sky turned gold, Sarah looked over and said, "You know, I think I finally like living here."